these times of fast change, have you ever thought architecture might be falling a bit short and wondered, what's next? Well, let's find out. My name is Luca De Stefano. I'm one of the founders of Known-A, and this is Boundary Breaking Businesses Beyond Architecture, designers and commissioners of tomorrow speaking today. Episode 5, Part 2, Career Change. Hi everyone, welcome back at Beyond Architecture. This is actually the second part of our conversation with Jake Rudin. If you missed the first, I highly advise you to go back because we left it on kind of a cliffhanger. For all the others, let's go.
Oh, Luca, you're breaking my heart. No, this is a fabulous conversation, and you are, you are not only a spectacular interviewer, but I think that your points are equally as valid. To argue the counterpoint, and in a sense, I think this is what I believe. There is power in, looking around you and understanding the context in which you are designing, and also that design is a part of a very large system. When we go into school at such a young age, that's not to say that we can't do amazing things. But I think it is still very true that it's really hard to grasp the reality of your position. And that reality really only sets in when you leave school and are thrust either into a position of zero control, in an architecture firm where you're being told you have no technical understanding, you've never done this before, you're starting from scratch. That is a real wake-up call for a lot of people. It's very, very jarring. Because in school you have total control over the creative process. Falling in love with that, though, is really important, because I feel like if we trained architects from their very, very earliest stages to understand how little control they had, the ambitions would be so highly diminished. We would never think that we would be able to do some of the absolutely incredible things that architects go out and do in the world, whether it's designing buildings or helping to rethink or restructure the way that we look at, certain areas of our lives. I'm hesitant to say that I, would want to give up that experience of, that total empowerment that comes with an architecture degree.
I have to say, I like that. You got me. Like the total empowerment that describes very well, that feeling of creating a design, imagining a reality that in the end might not happen, but it's there. I want to circle back to the way you work with out of architecture. I have just some practical questions to understand better what's your methodology.
Yeah, of course.
And so, who is part of your organization today?
We have an organization of about 10 people.
10.
Our whole team, our whole team is in some aspect or another, part-time, I would say. And for many of us, we have either a full-time job or we do this because we absolutely love it. The organization is myself and Aaron as the founders. We are also, sometimes advisors to clients still, although we're stepping away from that little by little here. We have 4 other advisors who have joined us over the course of the last year and a half or so, who work with clients all around the world. We have an advisor in the United Kingdom, Chi. We have an advisor in New York, Ellen. One in Los Angeles, Helen, and we have someone who is in Atlanta at the moment. His name is Nate. And, between the 6 of us, really, we support clients on everything in their transition, from deciding to make the transition through to kind of telling their own narrative, to applications, to the technicalities of, preparing materials or networking, and then all the way into even the very end of the process in salary negotiation. So we have a very strong presence in the kind of coaching and advising space. But we also have Sylvia, who is the host of Tangents, who runs the Tangents podcast for us and has been an absolutely fabulous contributor to the organization. And we have a couple of people who are in the background, but who do an immense amount of work on our socials and digital media and strategy, Nora and Jasmine, who handle that side of things. So it's a pretty large team at this point. And it has only become so over the last couple of years. It took a very long time to kind of establish and build a presence to the point where not only were we confident that we could support other individuals, and pay contractors, but at the same time, we were very shy of letting anyone into the brand, because it has really been something that I think has been kind of taboo for a long time to talk about, encourage people even to leave the profession, when they need to. Granted, we don't go out and tap architects on the shoulder and tell them like, you should get out, but we do, welcome them with open arms. And it's been wonderful though to find so much support in the community, and pretty much everyone who has come on board to the team has come in and found us and wanted to support the mission, and been an absolutely incredible asset.
So could we define you as career coaches in a way?
I think that's a very strong definition. We've been tossing around some other terms for the business as a whole because it's become so multivalent. Not only is it coaching and advising, but it's also, content. We do some recruiting. We do some, talent sourcing. We have a newsletter and a Patreon, and we have a podcast, and we're actually about to release a second podcast, and we have all kinds of, I'll tease that for later. So I think we're leaning more towards the idea of being, a career resource network for people where they can come to us at various points in their career, not just in the moment of transition.
So the experience is quite broad. You have seen a lot of people throughout the years. May I ask how many?
Personally, I am very close to 2,000 introductory calls. We do 30-minute calls with our clients.
No, sorry.
2,000.
Wait a second. 2,000
yes.
people.
But we as an organization are probably closer to about 5,000.
Okay, this is massive. I have no idea. I had no idea so far that this was so big.
Yeah. Yeah. We did,
Wow.
We maybe had 10 people the first year. We had something like 50 in the second year. Then we had several hundred. And then we had, I don't know, we must have had easily over 1,000 last year and so on. It's just been getting bigger and bigger. And there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the metrics because there are people who have come to us as clients, which is still in that thousands range. And then there are just people who have come to talk about out of architecture and find out what it is and express themselves. And, sometimes who have no intention of coming on as clients, but who we still end up in a little bit of career therapy,
How do you balance that with your job at Adidas? Because this is also quite a big piece of responsibility. Let's put it like that.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely true. People ask me that all the time. And I've heard a bunch of cliche answers like, well, you make time for the things that you love, or, you have to work hard to be able to establish your own thing. The truth of the matter is I am extremely lucky in the sense that, I've been able not only to find a role that I am very confident in, that, I understand what is being required of me, that I'm very capable of delivering, that I enjoy doing, but also a role that is in some ways a perfect fit for someone who has this particular passion, because I run a computational design engineering team. I work with a huge array of experts and specialists. And actually, the work that I do in Out of Architecture has a very positive impact on my work at Adidas. When I post a position for a computational designer, I have a pretty endless amount of applicants, which is something that can be very difficult to source and find. Obviously, the Adidas name helps with that quite significantly. But my work and my network has provided me with a really strong group of people who have supported me in hiring a huge number of roles. I have actually helped teams across the organization to find really specific talent for like geometric software development and for computational design and for marketing and visual designing. And it's interesting to see these things sort of overlap over the years. And what I realized early on was, I was very, very shy of saying anything about this passion project, right? This side business that I had. And the more I started to speak about it openly, specifically when we published the Out of Architecture book last year, I realized that my team, my management, they are so supportive of people doing what it is that makes them happy, and especially encouraging, bringing that and bringing your whole self back to work. So that is very much a positive element of culture that is pretty specific to Adidas, that I wish was common everywhere, that has allowed me to kind of balance these two things. So, the understanding nature of my team has made it really critical. And it actually makes it really hard to want to change jobs or move anywhere else simply for the fact that, when I interview at other places and they ask me about Out of Architecture, or when I tell them about it, I'm very clear that this is something that I do, on a daily basis. And I'm lucky that the Out of Architecture team handle the majority of things during working hours, but it's a big part of who I am. And I expect to be able to do that wherever I go.
That's interesting, because I think most architecture offices might have problems with something like this. Like, imagine you're running your passion project next to your main architecture job. How do they handle that? Like, I noticed this as a pain point. I don't know how you see it.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are very few examples within architecture of really supportive firms helping people to kind of do what it is that they crave. And yet I know so many people who have left architecture, and there's a much higher percentage of them who are doing something else on the side. In fact, most of our advisors work for companies that are excited that they're supporting and advising for Out of Architecture because they have access to this great talent pool. They have something else that they enjoy doing. They get other mentorship experience and coaching experience, which I should have mentioned earlier is, leading a team. I also, I need to be a good coach and a good leader. And I have probably more practice than anyone else in the Adidas organization at coaching and mentoring. So that's definitely another bonus if my boss is listening.
Well, if I counted right, it's 2,000 clients, half an hour intro call. It's at least 1,000 hours of practice, at least. It's
far more than that, but yes, it is at a minimum. So,
yeah, I have to say I was quite lucky myself throughout my design career. I also nurtured a passion project, which is also what brought us together today. But I also have the feeling that very often, at least in the past, there was this common notion of if you jump on board, you're not jumping on board of a company, you're jumping on board of a mission. And if you don't share the mission, then it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to be here, or I cannot trust you the same way I would trust someone else that is much more dedicated. Which makes me think more in general about what are the big trouble of architecture. Like, this could be one, but what do you think are the big issues today? Besides this ego component, like, what's wrong with architecture if people need to get out?
Well, you highlight a very, very strong problem, which is that, in many other industries, companies are paying you for a result, and in some ways they're paying for your time, but they're paying for the time it takes to get the job done, right? And doing, achieving a certain result or better is, in a sense, completion of your end of the bargain. Whereas in architecture, I feel like architecture firms feel like they're buying your time. And not only that, but they own your time. So even if you get the result done, you're expected to, continue doing as much as you can in the time allotted, right? Even under sort of extreme circumstances. But beyond that, there's no respect for the bounds of that, right? Even if you're being paid for a 40-hour work week, the expectation is that you're there every hour that you have available. And I think that is kind of the element that you were talking about in regards to like you're on board with the mission, not just the company, right? That if you are truly telling us that this firm and architecture and design are your life, then this should also be your passion. Why would you need to supplement your life with some other creative endeavor or some other, outside pursuit like hiking or, reading or friends? We're your friends, like we're your family. That mentality is so destructive and so painful. And I think it's unfortunate that people outside of architecture, it's very hard for them to see the level to which that is being carried out, and in a sense, it's very cult-like. And within architecture, it's very difficult to know what the norm is because so many firms act that way and treat people in that manner. I always get comments on these podcasts or posts or things like that, like, oh no, there's no way that people, treat each other that way. Like, that would never fly. That's illegal here in Australia or Germany, or we have set work weeks, or, in the Netherlands, this and this. But it happens everywhere. It's a very architecture specific thing. And, I worked, at Massimiliano Fuchs's in Rome and, had an absolutely, had an absolutely horrendous, experience, and was just shocked that coming from the States thinking, oh, I'm going to go to a European country, there's all these protections in place and work standards and everyone's so happy and they're always drinking cappuccinos and and
not like that.
No,
like
it was not like that at all. And I think it's really hard for people to understand it. And that's also part of what I mean about being a student is like, I think you need that period of protected falling in love with design in order to then go out in the world and, understand, oh, this is not what it's supposed to be like, because I was very lucky to come from, a school and, a set of privileges, obviously, like I'm a white cisgender male, from an upper middle class family. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that this is how everyone is being treated, but I knew going into the architectural context, oh, this is not right. Like, I am not being treated in the way that I should be being treated. And it's sad actually to be on the other side of it and have so many people come to me and say, this really bad thing happened to me. And, is that my fault? And very often that's, people of color, women, minorities, we have so much to apologize for in the architectural profession. And so much so even that it's kind of, still a little bit of a question of like, well, whose fault is it? Like, is it your fault for not being a good enough designer, or is it our fault for being, not a woke firm, or it's really hard to watch all of this play out even at a distance.
Jake, I'm resisting the urge of spending another 10 minutes talking about your experience at Fuchs's because I'm from Rome.
Yeah.
Fuchs's is like 10 minutes away from my house. I've heard horrible stories from multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do that. Let's stop it there, but thank you for sharing.
No problem. If you'd like to know more, there are some very good stories in the Out of Architecture book, and you're very welcome to go and listen and have a read. And yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to do that. Thanks for mentioning it. Also, you teased us before with a second podcast coming up.
Correct.
I think this fits the topic quite well. Am I right?
Yes, that is absolutely true. So over the thousands of calls that we've had, they range from people coming to us, with an offer in hand, who are super excited, people who, know exactly what they want to do, to the other end of the spectrum of people who are in complete and total crisis and feel absolutely isolated. And we've had people coming to us who were homeless because they were unable to afford to live in the place that they were working because the conditions and the pay were so bad. We've had people coming to us entrenched in legal battles with their employers or former employers. We've had people come to us with stories of workplace abuse. We've had people come to us with issues with visas, with, companies that have undermined them or lied or essentially blackmailed them into, working on completely unreasonable hours and conditions and all of these things. And it's crazy because these stories are not one-offs. They're not, as much as each person is individual and each kind of, tragic narrative deserves its own respect. It's very difficult to see this happen and to know that there are people out there who are inevitably going through these kinds of things, and thinking that they are the only one, or that maybe even it's their fault. And so we decided, that we were going to put together a new podcast. As I mentioned, Tangents is focused very much on the positive trajectories of people who have managed to take their skills and go on and do something else, in the world. But the new podcast, Red Lines, is focused around helping to tell the narratives and the stories that should be heard about, things that have happened kind of behind the curtain of architectural practices and schools. It is not intended to be a sort of, tell all drama, slap in the face to the profession. It's really meant to reach out to those individuals who need to hear that not only there are people who have kind of gone through these things, but also that there are ways of dealing with them, or that there are people that you can speak to about these topics, and really as a way of reaching out to that part of the architectural community who we still feel like are a little bit, underserved and under-recognized. So we hope to be releasing that here in the coming months. We might even have our first episode delivered sometime mid-October or in the fall. But yeah, I think the concept of it is to both preserve the anonymity of the individuals, but also to, kind of allow them to really openly share some of their stories with the world. So.
Okay, this sounds very good. I'm really curious to hear more. Before wrapping up, I wanted to ask you for advice to our listeners. That's something we do with every guest. With you, I'm going to take a bit more time.
Sure.
And I want to start from far away. First piece of advice for those that want to change career, that are done with architecture, want to try something else.
My first piece of advice is don't panic. I think there is very often a difficult mental grappling with this kind of sunk cost fallacy when you choose to leave architecture that says, I've invested so much time and energy in this one title. Now that I've chosen to leave, I have to start over. It's not true. It's really not true. And I think it's actually quite damaging to people's careers when they take that mentality. The piece of advice I would give to architects is to start to think even more positively and analytically about the skills that you've gained during your time in architecture. Try going back through your portfolio and looking at all the projects, and rather than thinking about the design intent or the circulation, think about the way that you solved that problem. Think about all the tools you implemented, the models you made, the different, data visualization diagrams, or the plans, the site context, the sections. Think about all the ways you analyzed that work and presented it and managed the project from start to finish, and, resolved minute details and costed out certain things. I mean, those skills, those are the things that you will be taking with you, not necessarily the way of waxing nostalgic about, some architectural past. And I think it's important to, at a very early stage in your transition, get into that positive mindset and be excited about applying and using all of these skills, some of which maybe have been dormant for years, in a new context.
Okay, beautiful. Second piece of advice, this time for those that want to stay within architecture. Maybe they're running a practice, or maybe they are already quite far in their career.
There's a long silence here because I'm trying to decide how polite to be. No, no. I think, we have clients who are very far in their career and still choose to transition. And that is really one of the things that I was thinking of as the primary answer. But we do have a lot of clients who choose to stay within architecture. But I think if you are at a point where you're considering a change, it's worth sitting down and figuring out why you're considering a change. Is it because you really want more money? And if it's because you want more money, what do you want to do with that money? What would another $20,000 a year mean to you, in your life, in your current context? What would you be willing to give up for that? Do you love the people that you work with? Do you love your commute? Do you love, the kind of work that you get to work on? As you start to figure out what it is that you want to keep the same and what it is that you want to change, I think your pathways will start to become more transparent. We often say that we ask our clients to treat their careers like a design problem. And I think that's a very good way for architects to approach their own careers, is to begin to put together a very specific brief, that says, this is where I would like to be. How much of that is the same as where I am, and how much of that is different? And I would just encourage architects who intend on staying in the profession to still look beyond the profession for comparable market conditions, comparable pay, comparable benefits, to understand what else there is out in the world. Because, architecture is pretty limiting, I think, when it comes to a lot of those things. You can bring in good things from other professions to your own practice that you're running, or to your own business, or even if it is, someone who is just freelancing, which I don't really particularly like that word, but if you are an architectural designer who's freelancing for a bunch of clients, what does it mean if you start to call yourself a consultant? And what does it mean if you charge a little bit more for that work because you really would like to be doing less hours, or you'd like to be, saving for some specific goal or reinvesting in your business? So all of those considerations, I think, are still valid, even if someone, doesn't want to leave the built environment.
Fair enough. I want to leave it there because I think we talked a lot and there is a lot to think about. I just want to thank you once again for joining us at Beyond Architecture, Jake.
Luca, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And if anyone listening cares to reach out, you're very welcome to get in touch through any one of the Out of Architecture socials or the website or anything like that. It'd be good to get my numbers up. I'm still looking to cross that 2,000 threshold. All
right, we are now back from our talk with Jake. It was very interesting, especially if you are now considering changing your career path. We have a little tradition in this podcast. If you are a usual listener, you might know by now. Every week, after our chat, we take a moment to think of a creative business model, or more specifically, a boundary-breaking business model inspired by our conversation with the guest. Here is our idea for this week. The side gig. You don't always have to start a brand new business venture, quit everything, leave it behind, and start fresh. Actually, what you could also do is stay in your day job, maybe spare one day a week to dedicate to something else. I know many designers do this already. Most likely they do it with their friends, like teaming up, doing some competitions. And if we get our big hit, we can start a firm and, become famous. I'm not referring to that specifically. I think that worked very well in the past 20, 50 years ago, if you want to be the next Renzo Piano winning a competition for a museum. But what's more likely is that you might build up in time your business. And ideally, to do that, I would still apply a business model, thorough thinking of what kind of pipeline of clients you would have, what niche you would serve, what is your acquisition and marketing channels, how much revenues are you going to make, structure it. Structure it maybe around small but specific ideas, and structure it in a way that you can manage it in one day a week. With that one day a week, you can start building something that complements maybe your day job and brings value in both realms. Something that, following the story from Jake, it could enrich your professional role in your day job, but it could also bring extra revenues, extra perspective for you as a person, as an individual. What that's gonna be, I have no clue. Maybe it could be one of the many business models we're exploring in this podcast. I let you think about that, and if you get some good ideas, please reach out. I'm very curious to hear it. You have the channels here, Known A Podcasts on Instagram and Known-A on LinkedIn. And whatever platform you're using, hit follow or subscribe and give us a rating. Thank you for staying with us, and I'll see you next week. Beyond Architecture is a Known A podcast. This episode has been developed with the financial support of the Dutch Creative Industries Fund. Editorial support and marketing for Known A, Marco Matteo Cristofori, Daniela Silva, and Francisco Rivera. Sound supervision by Daniel van de Poppe for Spraakmaker Media. Advisory, Max Augustijn, Martine Chloe van de Bomen, Francesco De Stefano, and Anne Bruna. I'm Luca De Stefano, your host, and this was Beyond Architecture.